Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you, Jamie McDonald. Jamie is the CEO of UpSurge Baltimore. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Otto. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. But before we go into your personal journey, if you could just give a brief overview to the audience, Jamie, of who is UpSurge Baltimore?
Sure. UpSurge Baltimore is an initiative that is about a year old, started in April of last year. And it was the result of a long series of conversations among a group of Baltimore leaders led by Johns Hopkins, Brown Advisory, University of Maryland, T. Rowe Price, Whiting Turner. It's sort of a who's who of Baltimore business and philanthropic leaders. And the goal was to fill a gap in our economy. You know, Baltimore has strong Main Street businesses and organizations that work to support Main Street businesses, and we have still a lot of large companies that call Baltimore home, and those sort of like large company support engines to work with those. And we had this burgeoning tech economy in Baltimore, but not a parallel initiative that was focused on how we really accelerate the growth of the tech economy in Baltimore, but how we do it in a way that is really responsive to the moment that we're in as a world, when we all recognize that equity and diversity are really foundational to business success, not, opportunities, or not obligations, but opportunities. And so we organized UpSurge around this vision to become the country's first Equitech city. Equitech is a phrase that we coined to describe what it would mean to have a truly inclusive tech economy. And so what that means from our perspective is really three things. It means, one, that we are, creating a friendly, supportive environment for tech companies of any background, led by founders of any background. But if they, work with us, we're constantly sharing the value, and my workmates, constantly sharing the value of diverse teams, leadership boards, and cap tables in terms of company performance. We could talk in a little later about some of the studies that have been done that demonstrate the impact that diversity has on company performance. The second piece is to really build a differentiated offering around supporting diverse entrepreneurs. So women, founders of color, LGBT founders, differently abled founders, and really sort of setting Baltimore apart as a city that, one, it makes sense just given the makeup of our city demographically, but secondly, we also have a particularly diverse base of entrepreneurs as a jumping off point. So we start in a strong place. And then the third piece, which I think is a really big part of what differentiates our effort from the tech ecosystem builders in other communities, is that we have a dedicated focus on also building on-ramps into technology for the Baltimoreans who want them. So that ranges from upskilling folks who perhaps don't have college degrees, to working with young people to just show them that technology is an option for their futures, to the actual, sort of the very obvious things, like trying to keep the students from our 14 universities in Baltimore working for our tech companies. So that whole sort of on-ramping work stream is one that is just not typical of other ecosystem builders around the country, but we think it's absolutely vital to the work that we're doing. So that's sort of UpSurge in a nutshell, but we can get into a lot more of the details with your questions.
No, definitely. I especially like the third part because it's very true. You don't see that much in the tech ecosystem.
That's right. And I think what we know is there's no lack of capability in communities that haven't necessarily found a pathway into technology before. There's generally a lack of awareness and a lack of that sort of that particular type of either education or skills training that others take for granted. And so we have sort of built an infrastructure in process. I mean, all of this is building, not built. but we sort of set our sights on 2030. Everything we talk about Equitech 2030. And by 2030, we want to be able to say that we're the world's deepest ecosystem of inclusive tech companies. And so we're building all those building blocks to work toward that goal.
I love that. I can't wait to get into it. But before that, a little bit more about yourself. Are you originally from the area here, the DMV area?
I'm not. I mean, I'm from up the road. I'm a native of Philly. I'm a city kid from, downtown Philly. I had a very young single mom, and we lived for part of my life in Center City, but most of my growing up in South Philly. And this was sort of in the Rocky era when, I was born in the 60s, and South Philly was sort of on everybody's minds because Rocky was so big then. And everybody remembers the famous run up 9th Street, the Italian market. I actually worked at a fruit stand in the Italian market when they were filming that. My little fingers are in the movie. As he's walking by, or running by. And, and I went to public schools in Philly. I went to this pretty amazing public school that I encourage everybody to learn about, that still exists today. It's a magnet school that was started, I want to say it was probably started in the 50s in Philly as an experiment, where they took kids of all backgrounds from across the city. And they didn't have any buses or anything, so you had to be willing to get yourself there on public transportation. But if you got yourself there, it was a school that everybody tested in 3rd grade, and kids were, given the opportunity to go to this school. And you started, with 2 languages and 4. So I went there 4th grade all the way through. You started 2 languages in 4th grade. So you took Latin and another language. I did Latin and French. Everybody, by the time they were, later in, were in calculus. And it was interesting because it was a school that by today's standards would be quite unusual. It was probably half Black, maybe 25% white, and then another 25% AAPI and Latino, and it was just such a melting pot of Philadelphia. And so I just grew up, and I think this has influenced a lot of my work over the years. I grew up thinking that brilliant kids looked like everybody. I just didn't know any different. The smartest kids in our class could have been Black, Latino, white, or Asian, right? There was no sort of separation in ability. And it's definitely influenced much of the rest of the way I've looked at the world for the rest of my life. Then I was a commuter kid in college. I went to a small school in Philly called Techstars. And now it's called Jefferson. It's had a couple iterations since then. But I took economics my 2nd year in college, and had a professor that really inspired me. And I was top of my class in this school. So, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from, you have, no matter what you do, you have to work hard, right, to get these kind of opportunities. And I ended up, through a relationship that he had, getting to go to Cornell for graduate school on a teaching assistantship, which I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. And so that was my stepping stone into my investment banking life, because despite the fact that I was the same kid, whether I went to Cornell or I didn't, I mean, I learned a lot, but I was still the same kid. I never would have even had a door open to me coming out of the college I went to undergrad. So Cornell opened a different door for me. And that also sits with me, right? That sometimes that one name on your resume just changes people's perspective on somebody who was really the same person before and after they had that opportunity. And then I went to work at Alex Brown, which was big investment bank in Baltimore. It was a national investment bank, but based in Baltimore. We were one of the first national specialty investment banks. So we worked with tech companies, broadly, but tech, consumer, healthcare, and transportation companies as really big tech was emerging. And it's funny because back then they were the risky companies. I started there in 1986, and we brought Microsoft, Google, Amazon. We brought all those companies public, Starbucks. But they were the high risk companies back then that the big investment banks weren't really touching. And we were the investment bank that brought them all public. We were ultimately sold to Bankers Trust and then Deutsche Bank. And I was there through that whole time. I worked really hard. I was managing director when I was 29, and
That's pretty young for MD, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was always like a year ahead in school because this is a going back thing because of Masterman. So I would have been 30 if I had graduated at the normal time for my age.
Okay.
But again, I did move fast. I was given a lot of opportunity there, and I ultimately spent the bulk of my time at Alex. Brown as co-head of the private equity coverage group. So I worked with venture capital, and back in the day we called them LBO funds. Nobody calls them that anymore. Making sure that we were on their radar for any deals that they might want to do with Alex. Brown, and that sort of gave me my real lens on what private equity looked like from the inside. And I saw it from both sides, because I saw it from the company side because they were our clients, and I saw it from the private equity side because I was a relationship banker. So that was where my relationships were. And then I became an entrepreneur, started and sold a couple of companies. And my second company, I actually sold to a DC-based company called Network for Good. It was a software company focused on online giving and civic engagement. And then I advised startups and social movements for the next 7 years until, the group of us started really talking about this need in Baltimore to really ramp up our tech economy. And here I am.
That's great. Jamie, when you mentioned LBO, it just brought back memories. Did you ever work with Mike Milken?
I didn't work with Mike Milken, but I did work with the other famous LBO funds of the day with KKR and those kind of firms.
Okay.
Milken was a bit before we were really, that was like one notch earlier than our group's formation. We were in the heyday of those like big mega industrial LBO deals, and the roll-up craze. I don't know if you would remember any of this. You're probably too young, but anyway, there were a few different, kind of LBO waves back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And it was a crazy time. And then ultimately, obviously, the shine came off LBO funds like significantly. And that's why they all stopped calling themselves that. And private equity became the term. But also hedge funds, a lot of them now are more blended entities. They're not really straight funds anymore. So it's continued to evolve. But it was an interesting time to be in that world.
So it was around, I guess, KKR, Kravitz. I don't know if it was before Boesky, Ivan Boesky, or Icon. And
yeah, I mean, they were all. So there was a difference between like the raiders, like the corporate raiders, like the Boeskys and those folks, and the actual funds, and particularly because again, Alex Brown was working with growth companies.
Okay.
So a lot of the LBO funds that we work with, if we were talking to KKR, it wasn't necessarily because we were going to work with one of their companies. We were often working with companies that their companies might want to acquire, because they tended to work with these big sort of mega industrial companies. That was who they were invested in. So we were hitting all different points of the continuum. With the smaller private equity firms, we were working with their investment companies, right? The things that they were invested in. And we were helping them go public or sell themselves or acquire other companies. With the big LBO funds, we were typically selling a company to them.
I understand. If I can take you back for a moment, you mentioned earlier you grew up with a single mother, right? Mm-hmm. In South Philly. How was that experience? You've accomplished so much, and I don't know if you have any siblings or anything, but how was it? How was the household back there? If you can take us back to South Philly.
Yeah, I mean, look, I had a very smart mother who, you know, she got married when she was 18 to the wrong person. You know what I mean? Like it's a story we all know. And, you know, and I have two sisters. She had all three of us by the time she was 23. And,
so three girls.
Yep.
Okay.
And, you know, and my mother was as smart, you know, it's sort of the same thing I was saying about myself. Like my mother is as smart as anybody who ever went to a great college or whatever. She just didn't have that pathway of opportunity. That wasn't her parents' priority for her to go to college. You know, it's a different era. And I think as a result, you know, for a chunk of my early growing up, she was the receptionist at the Y downtown. And I'm sure for her, that was probably a very like routine and frustrating and not particularly challenging job, but she moved up there. She became like the membership director and we got to go every day after school. And, you know, part of another thing that's been a big influence in my life that started really at the Y is I've always participated in sports. I still do today, pretty actively. And, you know, so I did gymnastics my whole growing up. My first company that I ever started, my first little startup, I started when I was 9. I basically started a little tumbling school for little kids because all the mothers would sit at the Y when their older kids were participating in activities and they would get frustrated. I don't know if you've ever been to an old-fashioned Y, but it used to be everything was in one big room, like the basketball courts, they'd like put the nets up during the day and like gymnastics would happen or like other sports, but everything was in one big giant room. So you can imagine if you're a mother with little kids and you're trying to like keep them from running around in this giant room, it was impossible. And I wanted, crazy the things that motivate you, but I wanted this pair of rainbow jeans that this cool girl in school had them and I wanted them and we couldn't afford them. And I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out how I make my own money. And so I literally created a little flyer on an old mimeograph machine. And I went around to all the mothers who had little kids. And I said, you know, I'll take your kids for an hour, $1 per kid per hour. I'll take 10 kids each hour. And for 3 hours in the afternoon, I would take these 10 kids into like this like padded room that again, they used to have in all the Ys. They did like jujitsu and, you know, martial arts and stuff. And so they had these padded rooms so people could kind of bang against the walls. And so I was making like $10 per hour for 3 hours a day, most days. And I got those jeans in like 3 days. And I started to really like figure out, I had my own money. And I got fry boots and I was like, I was able to start to do things that I had put myself in a position to accomplish. And so that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. I did a bunch of other things over the years. But I always just sort of had this sense that in a pinch, I could survive. I could figure out how to make money. And I always have appreciated that in terms of, you know, the opportunity for other people who might not otherwise see, you know, what the path forward is, that entrepreneurship can be a different way for people to find a path.
Sure. In your community in South Philly, did many end up going to Ivy League school or Cornell? Was that something common?
God, no. No, I mean, so there were some other South Philly kids that went to Masterman, and you know, I think they probably went to just a ring. I think we all had the kids, we got a great education. There was certainly the occasional kid every, you know, year or two that went straight into a really great school, but a lot of us went to like the Philadelphia schools, right?
Sure.
So we went, you know, Philly has so many colleges. It's like Baltimore. Philly probably has the same number, 13 or 14 colleges. And I think most kids, the issues back in the 80s, you know, it's just hard to project forward. But, you know, back in the 80s, a lot of kids made their choices, not just on the cost of the school, but the cost of getting to the school, right? So for me, one of the challenges with Cornell was just being able to get back and forth. I had to again, I worked, so I got myself a little car, a green Volkswagen Bug, and I would drive myself back and forth to Cornell. I had to learn how to fix it because if it broke down, you were like in the middle of nowhere back in those days. And so, yeah, I mean, I think graduate school was probably more likely the opportunity that some people had if they, coming out of the schools that we even going to a masterman. But you asked about my sisters. Interestingly, they are both quite smart too, but for whatever reason, never liked the best test takers. So they didn't go to masterman, and my sisters went to the zone school and neither one of them graduated from high school. So it does show you a bit like the difference in trajectory that a school can make. They eventually, one got their GED, one didn't, but they both are doing fine. But it does really show you kind of how sometimes like these small things that like they seem like 1 degree of difference when you're young, but they can be like huge degrees of difference as you get older. And so again, I'm mindful of this whole pathways, work stream that we're focused on, because I think that that could be that 1 degree shift in trajectory for people's lives that, really changes things in the long run.
Mm-hmm. How long were you at Alex Brown for?
17 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
In the private equity group there, right?
Well, so I started, I was initially actually hired just for what we thought was going to be a year or 2 project. I was hired by a guy who was on the board. That's a whole other story. Who he and the CEO at the time, this was 1986, they had just gone public and they were thinking about a couple of their key business lines. Retail back then is what we called the stock brokerage business, like traditional stockbrokers. That was where I started, was, I was brought in to do a big study of the retail client base. In grad school, I had done some market research. I wouldn't call it market research, but I'd done these big kind of research studies. And so I had an experience base that helped me get that first job. And so I did that first big project, presented the results to the board, got, I think, well connected with the people there that thought I was smart. And then the next big group that they wanted to understand was the relationships that they had with venture capital clients. And those were not people who were going to fill out surveys. So I was basically sent on like a road trip around the country to interview VCs all over the place. And ultimately created, did a study of what we found about their view of Alex Brown, when they would think about us, why they would work with us, why they wouldn't, what they saw as as sort of coming in the future, how they thought about investments in their own portfolios. And that work and the follow-up from it took about a year. So I built relationships with a bunch of VCs. And so when we, I recommended that essentially a relationship coverage group be formed in investment banking to do it. And not thinking that was going to be my role, but but I was eventually asked to take that on after kind of a couple of other pathways I went down. I think they tried to get it going and it didn't get going initially. And then I, with another guy who'd been a longtime investment banker, I sort of brought the marketing and the research lens on it. He brought the longtime deep deal knowledge, and together we built the group. And then that's where I was for about 13 years of my time there.
That's great. I'm sure, Jamie, that road trip you did across the country visiting to different VCs sort of helped cement and even deepen your relationship within that VC community, right?
I mean, it started my relationship. I had none before then. And but because these were like in-depth, look, a lot of VCs had good relationships at Alex Brown, but it's hard to talk to your point of contact and say what you do and don't like about what's happening. It was a lot easier I was not threatening. I was somebody just there to learn, and I could ask the questions like what has worked well, what hasn't. So I was spending, I would go into a firm basically for a day, and if they had, 5 partners that had worked actively with Alex Brown. I'd spent an hour with each of those partners. And then when I wrote the summary, I wanted to make sure we got it right. So I would send it back to them. And then sometimes I'd have a conversation about, well, you didn't quite capture, meaning me, Jamie, you didn't quite capture this, this point I was making. I was trying to really say this. So there was a lot of back and forth. And then we gave them essentially the ability to sort of bless the final report on their firm's view of Alex Brown. So there was a lot of back and forth to make sure that we were accurately reflecting the opportunity and the challenges in our relationships with them. And so it just started it off.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a different kind of dialogue than they'll typically have with an investment bank.
Okay. After 17 years, what made you decide to leave?
Well, truthfully, what made me decide to leave was 2 things. So my husband, who wasn't at Alex Brown when I started, but we met, he actually moved to Alex Brown when I'd been there maybe 5 years. So we were both working there. After the Deutsche Bank acquisition, most of the investment banking work was starting to migrate to New York and London. We didn't have any interest in moving, but I might have been able to stay working in Baltimore. But my husband, they were talking to about going to Chicago. We're just like, we're married, right? Like, even if I stay, he can't go to Chicago and I go to New York or London, and we don't want to have, like, we want to stay in Baltimore. Our kids were, I have 3 kids. Our kids were, in my younger ones were in, middle school at that point. My daughter was, was little, but like, it just wasn't the time for us. Plus, Deutsche Bank had bought a mutual fund company called Scudder, and they were offering a very generous buyout to managing directors. And so they ultimately made that available to everyone across the firm, every MD that was interested. I shouldn't say that I know it was everyone. They certainly made it available to all the Baltimore-based Alex Brown MDs if they were interested in taking a buyout and not moving to one of these other places. So for me, it was a great time to go, got a great check going out the door. And 17 years is a long time. I was definitely ready to think about what was next. And, I had a great run, for a long time with people I really enjoyed working with. And even in the Deutsche Bank period, that had its own interesting benefits, because as a European bank, they were more progressive around things related to women. They had certain benefits that looked a lot more like a European company than US company. So each phase was interesting in different ways, but I felt like I had sort of reached a point where I'd gotten what I was going to get out of it.
When you reached that point, did you have any idea what would be the next chapter?
I didn't. I think that I think I probably always knew that it was going to be entrepreneurship in some form,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew whether I was going to go work for an entrepreneurial company, whether I wanted to start something on my own. Like, I really didn't know. And honestly, after that long in one place, I think that I also felt like I needed a little bit of time, that I had been essentially hurtling forward since I was a kid, because I never had the ability financially, until well into my Alex Brown years, I never had the ability financially to take a real break and think. And so, anyway, it was a chance for me to step back and reflect and decide what was next for me. And it took me a little while to get there, but yeah, the entrepreneurship was probably always going to be what it was, but I wasn't sure when I left.
Sure. I know after Alex Brown, you mentioned you started several companies. What was that first one after you left Alex Brown?
Yeah, so my my first one was actually a gym. I told you I've always been really into sports, and I didn't start this company thinking I would actually work in it. I was thinking I was doing it as an investment. That's like the first dumb mistake of entrepreneurship ever, the biggest dumb mistake ever. I mean, so it was a very specialized gym specifically for athletes. There are many more of those now, but this would have been 2003, and they were starting to emerge around the country. I'd always played and coached sports. I had kids who were athletes. I had some connections with the Ravens and some other people, and I thought that this concept of hiring strength and conditioning coaches from colleges across the country, they don't make any money. And like, you could bring them into an environment where you could pay them a little more than they were getting paid. They can still work with, high school, college, and in some cases, professional athletes in a gym built for that purpose. And my goal was I was going to hire somebody to run the whole place, and it was an investment. It was just sort of something that really interested me. And while I figured out what was really next for me, it felt like this was an interesting business to invest in. Well, about 6 weeks in after we opened, I was like, what the heck have you done? And the thing I learned was, it's not that I was wrong necessarily about my instinct. Business was actually good. But the thing that I misjudged was how much I needed to be present. Like there's just no replacement for an entrepreneur's passion and energy in a business. And you can't just hire, you just can't hire somebody, particularly something kind of innovative and different where there's not necessarily a strong model for how to do it well. You can't just hire somebody and sort of say, go make this a home run. So I did ultimately get to the point a couple years in where I did find that right person who could really lead it. But for a couple of years, I was like working crazy hours in sort of a retail business, right? And the thing about retail businesses, I have so much respect for small business owners, is they are judged often by things that have no relationship to their product. And what I mean by that is, so I owned a gym for athletes. So the product was, are we training athletes to perform better in their chosen sport? And we were doing that so well. But when you own a gym, you are judged by the friendliness of the person at the front desk, and whether the toilet paper is on the toilet paper roll, and whether, there are clean towels in the bed. Like, you're judged on all these other things that really don't have much to do with your product. And I think that is something that we don't give enough credit to really successful small businesses that get all those different pieces right. That is so hard to do. And particularly if the owner of the small business was doing something in a lane of their passion. So because you essentially become a small business owner, and then you get to you have to stop working in your passion. You work on all the other things. Right? The people that get to work on the passion points are the other people, right? So my coaches and the sort of the GM worked with all the athletes. I worked with their complaining parents and on making sure that all the other stuff was right. And those are really tough businesses. So I had always said to myself, because I was viewing it as an investment, that I was going to give it 5 years. And I got so lucky because we sold in July of 2008, and the world went to hell in August of 2008. Everything crashed. And so sold the business well, didn't make a fortune, but did fine, learned a ton, and then said, I'm going to sit back and reflect on this entrepreneurial experience for a while, and then didn't start my next company till 2011. I just kind of did some advisory stuff, and it was really quite an experience.
After that experience, Jamie, did you ever do anything retail related again, or no?
Never. And told my kids, don't ever do this if unless you absolutely have to. But I will say, I worked with a bunch of entrepreneurs who had those kinds of businesses, just to sort of like, share my experiences. In Baltimore, I do a lot of free coaching. Outside of Baltimore, I have a paid had a paid practice. But I created this group called The Courageous, which was, essentially folks who were trying to start either businesses or other kinds of initiatives that, where I could give them the benefit of my experience. And so, it was really one of the most formative experiences of my life, owning that kind of a company. And while I don't wish the stress and the frustrations of that kind of business on anybody who isn't really up for it, it is a tremendous learning experience and gives you a lot of respect for people that own small businesses.
Yeah. You mentioned coaching. So you no longer have that coaching and advisory practice?
No, I mean, because essentially with UpSurge, I do that all day, every day with Baltimore founders now. And I do think it's the kind of thing I can always go back to if, someday I retire and I don't know, sit in the sunshine and I decide I want to have some clients again. But I mean, I'm very like this gives me the ability to do that work, which I do love, but to do it in a really strategic way that is trying to move a whole city economy forward, or at least a piece of it, around this work. And so in many ways, it is sort of the ideal culmination of a lot of my experiences and my passion for Baltimore, all coming together at once. And I'm in my mid-50s now. So like, really, if I think about it, this is sort of like, I don't know, this is a last big sprint toward whatever lies on the other side of this. I don't like to say retirement because it's a little hard for me to imagine like not working, but I won't necessarily work this way, at some point. And so this is, this feels like it's the absolute sort of perfect culmination of, a 30-some year career kind of moving toward this moment.
Yeah. How did you and UpSurge come about being together?
Well, I was part of that working group that was thinking about tech in Baltimore. So just part of a group of folks that were talking about it, with those people that I mentioned. And ultimately, as we started to think about who could run it, they just sort of said, look, you're the person to do it. And it took me a little bit to decide. I knew how much of a lift it was going to be, and how hard it can be to do something that sits at a pretty emotional intersection of opportunity. And so I thought hard about it, but I'm glad that I did it. And a big part of making that all work was hiring the right team. And I have an amazing team that we've brought together working on this. And so, and we brought Techstars to Baltimore, which is a global accelerator. So we did some things right out of the gate that I think were really important, because we coined the phrase Equitech. So when we launched, we already had this defining vision. When we worked with Techstars, one of the first things that we did is we made it the Techstars Equitech Accelerator. So the first global Equitech Accelerator. So Equitech both as a word and as a vision, got the Techstars megaphone globally. Like that's because Techstars has a huge global startup megaphone. And we could never have done that on our own. So that was part of the reason we partnered with Techstars, was we knew, in addition to being a strong accelerator partner, we also knew that their megaphone gave us value that we couldn't derive. We couldn't go pay a marketing firm to go do that for us, because we couldn't accrue that kind of credibility. So we did a few things right out of the gate that I think were important. And then, as I said, having the right people on the team, like living what we talk about. We have a fully diverse team, and then really making sure that we're constantly celebrating and supporting everyone, but continually educating and hopefully driving people to think more concretely about how they embrace Equitech and inclusion and diversity as, as an opportunity and not an obligation, not a checkbox to be checked because you have to, but something that is actually going to drive your company performance. One of the things we say all the time as a team is we're sort of like a house of worship, a church, a synagogue, whatever, that everyone is welcome through our doors. But if you come in to our work, you're going to hear the things we believe, and the things that sort of are the values that underpin our work. And we hope that people consider embracing those in their own, progress as a company.
That's great. How are you able to involve the community in Baltimore, as far as you mentioned, sometimes you have to retrain certain individuals as far as a career in tech. How do you do that?
It's not easy, and it's something that it's going to take some time.
Mm-hmm.
We have, we've been focused as our first point. So remember, Equitech 2030. So we have a long runway that we know is what it's going to take to really get there. The thing we're starting with out of the first year, sort of really looking at where we think we can have the most impact the fastest. I have a fundamental belief that as a society, we need to place more emphasis on parents. And I have a phrase I use a lot that, we're going to help kids one parent at a time. So everything that we're starting with is aimed at adults who are looking for a different kind of opportunity, because I believe that the quickest way to change our most challenged communities is to empower and strengthen the adults in those communities, because the ripple effect of an adult whose life trajectory shifts ripples to their neighbors, to their children, whereas the ripple effect of a child who gets a better educational opportunity doesn't really ripple up, right? So we're really focused on adults as our first path of opportunity. And we're looking at a series of partnerships with big companies that have certification programs. I don't want to name names because we don't know which ones will solidify, but we've got 4 major tech companies that we're talking with right now, where they have the kinds of certifications that can move people into family advancing jobs. And, and the distinction there is family sustaining is $25,000, $35,000, $40,000 maybe in a city like Baltimore. Family advancing is when you move beyond that $40,000 threshold, and these kind of certified tech jobs are one really concrete path to do that. So that's a first focus for us, is how we build 3 or 4 key partnerships with these kind of, global tech companies who do upskilling work, and then work with community-based organizations who have a pool of people who are looking for these kinds of opportunities and bring that all together. So that's the first focus. Over time, we have a whole series of other pieces of that pathways work that we want to pursue. But that's our first, really concrete goal.
That's great. And who's training these people? Is it the same tech company or?
Yeah, so each program is slightly different, but most of them actually put trainers on the ground in cities across the country where they have partnerships.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah.
And right now you're in the process of selecting which one, right?
I don't want to make it sound like we have all the control, but we're in the process of building partnerships.
Sure. Okay.
With tech companies. We want them to believe in Baltimore. We want them to meet our counterpart local organizations that can provide the talent.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to trust us that we'll be, effective cheerleaders, on the ground supporters of their work.
I see. What would you say drives and motivates you?
It's such a big question. I have 3 kids. I'm going to have grandkids someday, presumably. And
is it all 3 girls too, or no?
No,
Oh.
two sons and a daughter.
Okay.
Sons who are in their one's 31, one's 29, and then I have a daughter who's 23. I look ahead at their world or their children's world, and I know that we have an opportunity right now to set a different course as a country and a society, but I'm a big believer in capitalism, and I think it starts with opportunity and pathways of opportunity. And I don't mean capitalism in the greedy mercenary way. I mean that I've personally experienced, and I know so many people that come from underinvested, underestimated backgrounds where, entrepreneurship or the right kind of job pathway has really been the difference in their opportunity. And I don't say that at all to the exclusion of other innovations. Like, I'm actually quite a big believer in universal basic income. I think that can sit, within a capitalistic framework. But in any case, that's one piece. I think that the other thing is I'm just incredibly passionate about Baltimore, and I want to be part of redefining a great American city for its future. So I think those things drive me. And just in general, I definitely thrive on doing hard things. So I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but that, I guess, that's at least some of the things that drive me.
I love this passion for Baltimore. It reminds me, I think my first trip to Philly, I forgot how old I was, but I was there and I was like, this reminds me a lot of Baltimore.
Yeah. There definitely are a lot of parallels between the cities. I mean, Philly is way bigger, and in tech, Philly really started building on they have a huge pharmaceutical industry in Philadelphia, and that was definitely kind of an anchor growth engine in tech in Philly, but lots of other things have sort of grown out of that. I think the differences between Baltimore and Philly are, Baltimore has this really interesting mixed legacy. It literally sits on the Mason-Dixon line. It was one of the first cities that welcomed, if you've ever read the history of Baltimore, that welcomed, free, formerly enslaved people into like the economy of Baltimore. And in particular, Fells Point, which is a really beautiful old historic area of Baltimore, was kind of the waterfront and like shipbuilding and sort of sea merchants part of Baltimore. And that became a place that was, incredibly welcoming of formerly enslaved people. But it also has, we've done some of the amazing sort of, like Enoch Pratt Free Library was the first fully open free library in the country to people of all races. But we also were the place where redlining was developed, right? So we've just got this very fraught history. And I think that if there is a place for Equitech to become a reality, we are the place where that should happen.
Jamie, you're so much immersed in the business, tech, entrepreneurial world. If any individual would come to you and said, Jamie, my dream is to have whatever type of company, what are a few pointers, suggestions, advice you would give that person?
Yeah, starting a company is not to be taken lightly, is what I would tell them. That, they should recognize that entrepreneurship is a fantastic avenue if you can stomach the stress and the ups and downs. It's just not easy, even if you have the greatest idea in the world and for whatever reason you get lucky and things go well. You're responsible for the livelihood of your employees, you'll have customers, you'll have to raise money, or maybe you won't. Some businesses don't have to, but most do, which makes you beholden to other people that get to have opinions about things, right and wrong, about what you're building. It's a hard thing to do. And I would also say that a lot of people start businesses because they're passionate about some problem that exists in society that they think they can solve with technology or with a product. Often the founder doesn't work on the thing that they're passionate about. You work on everything else, right? And the people that work on the thing that you're passionate about are the product development people or the sales people that get to build relationships with potential customers. You work on hiring and fundraising and payroll, and you work on all the stuff that's not glamorous and fun, particularly in the beginning. And I just think a lot of entrepreneurs assume that because they're passionate about a problem that they get to work on the problem, and they generally don't. And I think that the other thing that I would say about being an entrepreneur, we're having this conversation a lot right now in Baltimore. We check in with our founders a lot, wherever they are in their journey. And we were talking to one of our more accomplished founders, a founder that's approaching their Series C, business is good. And he sent us a note back this week, which we're going to share in our newsletter next week, that basically said, with everything that has happened in the last 3 years, with the pandemic, with, all of the racial upheaval in our country, with, in Baltimore, there's a lot of particular things in Baltimore that people are dealing with. He said, I don't know a single founder that loves their job right now. He said, doesn't matter what stage their company is in. It doesn't matter if they're fundraising or not fundraising. It's just been such a challenging period that every founder is unhappy. And I think that's a perspective that is very real, and that we don't talk about enough, like how we care for the innovators. By definition, innovators live on the edge, right? They're on the far end of the bell curve, because you have to be to make change. And that can be a really lonely, stressful place to be. So that's advice I'd give a founder. Think hard about all that.
It's not an easy road.
It's not. And sometimes, somebody said to me once that what's that saying about a boat, that the happiest day when you own a boat is like the day you buy it and the day you sell it, right? I think entrepreneurship is actually a little bit like that too. It's like the day you start, maybe there's a few big wins, but probably the next happiest day is the day you sell it, or the day you decide to walk away, which some percentage of entrepreneurs have to do.
So go ahead.
No, it's just, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. So would you then recommend entrepreneurship to not anyone, because it's not for anyone, but let's say your children, for example?
Well, my children are each really different. And for one of them I would, and for two of them I wouldn't.
Okay.
Or I should say it differently. It's not that I would recommend it. For one of them, I wouldn't necessarily discourage him. For the other two, I probably would.
Okay, I understand. Are there any specific traits or habits you feel you have, Jamie, that have helped you, whether on the business side of things or personally?
Yeah, I think that one of my, I'm a big believer that most people's biggest strength is also their biggest weakness. So my strength and my weakness is I'm a narrow swinging pendulum, right? And what I mean by that is I don't get too excited when things are good, and I don't get too down when things are tough. So because my pendulum swings narrow, that's a real coping mechanism for an entrepreneur. Because if you get too excited when things are good and too upset when things are bad, it is really hard to keep pushing through those hard moments. So that's a strength and a weakness, because in other facets of my life, being a narrow swinging pendulum is not a great attribute. So, that I would say that that's one thing. And probably the other thing is, I participated in this thing once. We've all done these like group. It was one of these like business group things, and you spend 3 days together on like a retreat thing. Anyway, at the end, people, like, each person is sort of given like a defining characteristic by the group.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that people told me was, I give other people courage. And so that is something else that I do. I'm a real believer in people's talents, and I think I can often see like the thing that can help them over a hump or help them see an opportunity. And I don't know, and because I'm not, I'm at a different point in my career also, like I'm not trying to prove much myself. And so I'm really like, how do we put every bit of energy and resource into helping other people find their path to success? So I don't know, that's another thing.
I like that. What's your biggest challenge with your role at UpSurge today?
I think the biggest challenge is one that many ecosystem builders, particularly if you think about your ecosystem and you're in a black city like Baltimore, you're thinking about your ecosystem holistically. I think that it's a difficult line to walk often between recognizing that it's vitally important to have a tech economy. And if you have a tech economy in 21st century America, by definition, it's going to be largely white men right now, right? That doesn't mean that has to be what we're, and we want to celebrate those innovators, right? Like we're not taking anything away from the creativity, the sort of the support they need, and how much we want to celebrate the impact that they can have on changing the world and employing people, and being those bright lights that show that you can build a great company in Baltimore. At the same time, we also know that, and I have children that fall in this category should they ever become entrepreneurs, that the access to networks, to money, to experience, to just that innate entitlement that this is a possible path, puts people on a different path than folks who haven't had those same experiences. And so how we walk that line between saying, look, because even when I talk to Black founders, they're like, look, I don't want to go to any city where I don't know tech can thrive. So you got to show me that a tech economy exists, period, right? It's why you see entrepreneurs from all different backgrounds, migrating very much to traditional tech hubs, because they too want to be in places where they know tech can thrive. So it's a real juggling act to both support, grow, nurture, and align around the tech companies that have momentum, but also to recognize that in many instances, they have momentum because they've had a stepping stone sequence of opportunities that have put them in a place where they can build a thriving company. And how do we build those steps of opportunity for a lot of other people to recognize that they too can build here? So it's an important tension, but one that we're tackling every day.
Yeah. You've had such a rich business career and background. What do you know now, Jamie, that you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
Yeah, I don't know, really. I think if you think about the eras I've worked through, I mean, going into investment banking in the mid 80s, when not my first boss, who was awesome and somebody that like really changed the trajectory of my life. But my second boss was a guy that in my first meeting with him told me that I wore my skirts too long. I mean, and that honestly was like, I don't even say that like that's a big deal. That was totally normal, right? That like I was in an era when things for women were certainly changing, but it was very normal for men to feel that they could say things like that to women, and for women to sort of just swallow hard and be like, okay, like I got a great job. I work for a guy who's sort of a caveman. All right, we're going to deal with it, right? Like, so I think that in some ways, because I started in my professional life when I did, I was really learning in the moment the things I needed to know to survive in that environment, particularly coming from my background where I never knew a business person. Everybody I knew was in the services industry growing up, right? They worked in retail shops, or my mom worked at the Y. Like everybody was in the services industry. So business was sort of a whole different thing. And so it is a little hard for me to sort of say, like, what do I wish I knew then? I think what I would say to a young person today is that, like, no job is perfect. Every job has both the exciting and the mundane. And truthfully, you're lucky if you get to like 60 or 70% exciting and 30 or 40% mundane. Like, that's a great job, right? Most are more like 50-50. And so like go into any job just saying like, how do I extract as much learning as I possibly can? I've gone through this with my own kids. Pick a job based on the people more than the role. Because if you go in and you like the people and you are motivated to work hard and you're smart enough, like people will adjust a role to fit a really good person, right? But
Yes.
people aren't going to adjust a role to fit somebody who's not happy or who feels like they don't fit with the team. And then I would say, give it a little time. I think that there's a generation of people now that tend to switch jobs every year or two. And sometimes you don't find your rhythm in a place for 2 or 3 years. So give it a little time and just keep extracting the learning that you can and keep offering input and asking for input. I don't know. Those are things I would tell somebody today getting started.
No, that's all great advice. Thank you. Did you have any big mentors? And if so, what did you learn from them?
I did have a couple of mentors that were really important in my life. I don't think we used that term back then. They were my bosses, but they were bosses who just really saw in me perhaps even more than I was seeing in myself at the time. And so one in particular, several, the guy that first hired me was truly somebody that he was one of those people that could convey a lot of belief in someone else. So I had that model from the beginning of my career. And, but my second kind of, my second really high impact boss, not the guy I mentioned a moment ago, he said something to me once that has really been a credo I try to live by. It was when I was up for a big promotion and I didn't get it the first time around. And I was probably too young really to get it. This was not managing director. This was the one before that. And it was to be a principal. And I was so pissed. I just thought like, I had much more youthful emotions then than I do now. And I kind of went to him a little bit foot stomping, like, what the heck?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of sat me down and he said, Jamie, you have accomplished so much in such a short time. Like, you've done this and this and this. He kind of enumerated all these things. He's like, you've just gotten this co-headship. You're in a role that based on, where you started, the path you've been able to carve out for yourself here is one that just like has unlimited opportunity. And he said to me, he said, you know what, you're always looking up the mountain at how far you still have to climb. He said, you got to turn around every once in a while and look back down the mountain. And that is literally something like I will occasionally say that to myself, and I say it to my team. I've done this now through many iterations of my companies and my career, that we've got to take those moments, like take a day once a quarter when we sort of have a look down the mountain session, like look at all we accomplished this quarter, can't even talk about what's still ahead. So that idea of stopping, turning around and looking back down the mountain is something I really took from, as he gave me a lot of other good advice, but that's one that has always really stuck with me. And, and look, then you're going to turn around and you're going to keep looking up and you keep going, but to take those moments and sort of look like, okay, I get to appreciate the view from here for a minute. Like that's a really powerful thing.
I like that. Coming to an end here now, Jamie, and talking about up the mountain, what does the future look like for you in UpSurge Baltimore for the next couple of years? I know you have the 2030 mission and vision there.
Yeah. So there are a whole bunch of things that we're working on, but probably the one thing we really haven't spoken about the most is one of our core strategies. So we've got company support. So, if you think about how you grow a city, we've got to make sure that the companies that are already launching and growing in Baltimore have everything they need to be successful. And whether that is education, whether that's access to networks, whether that's introductions to investors, whether that's peer support, we're working on building out all that infrastructure so that companies in Baltimore have everything they need to be successful. The second piece is you've got to attract companies from the outside. So our core company attraction strategy is the goal that we have to build a global Equitech accelerator hub in Baltimore with 10 accelerators. So we want to have 10 global accelerators by 2025. And what I mean by that is these would be accelerators that would be MVP stage or beyond. We've got lots of other incubators and accelerators that exist in Baltimore today that are concept and idea stage, super early stage accelerators. We were missing that like next stage accelerator. So the Techstars Equitech Accelerator is one of those. Then we built a partnership with Stanley Black & Decker, and they moved an accelerator from Hartford to Baltimore. So that's two of these kind of global accelerators. Now we're working on, I've got 5 active conversations. We want to have 10 of these by 2025. I'd like to have 2 or 3 more signed this year. And the reason that these accelerators are important is because you can't just go around the country and say, come move your company to Baltimore. It's awesome, right? What we need to do is we need to give people the experience of being in the tech community in Baltimore for a period of time and weaving them in, introducing them to the people who make a difference in the tech community here, showing them the real estate in Baltimore and how well you can live inexpensively in Baltimore, meeting the other brilliant people that live in our city. So we had that as a thesis, and we've tested it with the first 2 Techstars Equitech and Stanley Techstars classes. And in those first 2 classes, there were 21 companies initially. 2 were from Baltimore. So we sort of take them off the table. Of the 19 that weren't from Baltimore, 9 have either moved here or are making, they're international companies that are making Baltimore a US home. So if you think about that, 9 of 19 get to experience the ecosystem and decide that this is a great place to stay and grow. So we won't always be at 50%. That's not even our goal. Our goal is 25 to 30. But if we can build these 10 accelerators, have 150 to 200 companies accelerating here every single year, and we're keeping a chunk of those companies, that plus the organic growth of the companies that are growing in Baltimore will create this 2030 most inclusive tech ecosystem in the world. That's how we do it. So that's one big piece that we haven't talked about. And, and it's our core company attraction strategy. So we're working really hard at that.
I love that. Almost 50%. That's great.
We don't expect that to be.
Okay.
I think that I think we're benchmarking 25 to 30%.
Sure.
I'm going to leave it there. If we outperform, I'll be happy, but that our expectation and our numbers are built around that lower number.
Okay. Maybe it's beginner's luck, who knows, but that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're not busy working, what do you like to do for fun in your free time?
So I've mentioned sports a lot. So I play a lot of racket sports. I play a lot of tennis. I play pickleball. I will run and walk, and I love physical activity, but I particularly love sports. I would much prefer playing a sport to working out. So that is a big part of my free time. I like games, so I'm a big game player. I play like pretty expert level backgammon, and I play a lot of card games with my family and other people. And so I do all of this. Like, I am competitive, but I'm really competitive against myself. Like, I don't mind losing in tennis, for example, if I've played well, and I hate winning ugly, right? Like, I work hard against myself. So I'm my biggest competitor.
I just got into pickleball earlier this year, Jamie, and I took some classes and I love it. It's great. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. It was really thought of as kind of an older person's sport for a long time, but now I play with people from like their 20s to their 70s. I love that about it.
Yeah, I was trying to get into some group, but then it was saying you have to have a minimum age requirement. And I'm like, okay, I don't meet that yet. But speaking of the Y, it was through the Y I was able to get in and learn my local Y, and then that's how I picked up pickleball. And actually, my post today in LinkedIn, it's about pickleball.
Oh, funny. I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that the other thing about it that is like, so during COVID, my kids all came to our house, and we were a pod, and I bought a pickleball net for our driveway. Wasn't quite the right size, but we made it work, and we would put out like chalk lines, and like we could just all go out and it's like the fact that it's kind of compact, and that you can like literally buy a net and sort of set up chalk and play almost anywhere. That's much harder to do with so many sports. And so I really do think that its accessibility that way is something that is part of the reason it's catching on so fast. But yeah, it's really a fun sport.
Yeah, that's great. Jamie, if people want to learn more about you and UpSurge Baltimore, where can they find out more information, please?
You can just go to upsurgebaltimore.com, and we're in the midst of we still have our first generation website up, and like cobbler's kids, have no shoes. Like we need to have our own better website. So we're in the midst of a big website redo to reflect kind of the work that's taken place this first year. So keep an eye out in another few weeks. We've got some exciting evolutions coming to our own site. But upsurgebaltimore.com gives a good picture of our work.
Great. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Great to meet you. And let's keep building the DMV into the tech powerhouse we know it can be.
I agree. We need to be up there.
Well, we're up there, but we want to
keep climbing.
We want to be right up there with the top ecosystems in the world. So thanks so much for your help.
Of course. Thank you. Take care.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.